Hello and welcome. You're watching News Audit. I'm Dipavali Hazra. A landmark event in geopolitics is going to take place on 29th of February when the US and the Taliban ink a historic peace deal. This peace deal will ensure that American troops can finally start withdrawing from the war-torn country after one of the longest conflicts that America has had. So what does this mean? This means that Taliban will regain a lot of influence if it has not already, and it will be one of the primary forces in our neighboring country of Afghanistan. What does it mean for India? India so far has never engaged diplomatically with the Taliban. It's always engaged with the democratically elected Afghanistan government. India has not touched the Taliban with even a barge pole. It's not figured in our diplomatic relationships at all. So what does this huge geopolitical change mean for India? We will analyze that in this episode. So for starters, let's go back and talk about, give you a brief background about the Afghanistan war and how it all started. So back in 2001, when the 9/11 attacks were carried out that killed at least 3,000 people in the United States, that is when the US administration decided to launch airstrikes in Afghanistan because the attacks were traced to Osama bin Laden, who was then being protected by the Taliban. So after US and its allies there was a US-led invasion of Afghanistan which brought down the Taliban from power, and the US then was instrumental in establishing an elected government in Afghanistan. And since then, the US has been trying and struggling very hard to keep this government in place and at the same time end terrorism, end Taliban and its terror attacks basically in the region. That has been the US's plan in Afghanistan. That has what's the US been doing in Afghanistan so far. Now, why does US want to pull out of the country at this juncture? Well, of course, any war requires a lot of input in terms of human resources as well as a lot of money being pumped in and being diverted from America to Afghanistan. So it's draining American resources, and the Trump administration before the presidential elections in November really wants to get this withdrawal started. That is something the Trump administration has been pushing for. In fact, the peace talks with the Taliban began in 2018, so they've been going on for 2 years, and they're close to clinching a deal now. So what would a US exit from Afghanistan really mean for India? Afghanistan is in our neighborhood, and a stable Afghanistan is of course in India's interests. It has a neighbor which is hostile like Pakistan, and another one which is not very friendly like China. So in its neighborhood, it would want as many friendly nations as possible, and Afghanistan being one of them, India would want it to remain stable, have a democratically elected government in place, have a government that respects human rights, and hopefully not have the Taliban reinstated, because remember, it is after all at the end of the day a radical and armed Islamist group. So of course now we can't say Taliban regaining a huge foothold in the country will be beneficial for India. India, remember, has never engaged with the Taliban. In fact, back in the 90s, when the Indian Airlines flight was hijacked, the Taliban actually held Indian nationals hostage in return for terror mastermind Masood Azhar. And so India had to relent. India had to release Masood Azhar, and Azhar then went on to establish the Jaish-e-Mohammed, which was directly responsible for the 2001 parliamentary attacks on India and several other terror attacks since then. So that was the last time India actually talked with Taliban, and of course Taliban being a terror group has ties. Pakistan also has ties with the Taliban. Pakistan wields a lot of influence on that group. In fact, people say that if Pakistan may not be outrightly supporting the Taliban, but it is definitely sheltering the terror groups. So with that link between Taliban and Pakistan, India has never really negotiated with the group at all. But now with it gaining resurgence and gaining some legitimacy as far as Afghanistan is concerned, what will India do? So to counter Pakistan's influence in Afghanistan, or on the Taliban for that matter, India has been very carefully cultivating a friendship with Afghanistan, with the established government there. So we have seen how Modi, the Prime Minister Narendra Modi, has gone to Afghanistan several times over his last tenure and met the Afghanistan President Ashraf Ghani. Ashraf Ghani and Modi are set to share a rather close relationship. Under this administration, the Indian administration, a lot of investment has been made in Afghanistan to ensure that peace and stability remains in that nation. India has invested heavily in infrastructure projects. So India does have a lot at stake, a lot of investment at stake as far as Afghanistan is concerned. And it is in India's interests to have a stability in that nation. Now, of course, India also, remember, New Delhi has been one of the primary forces that has aided the reconstruction of the war-torn country of Afghanistan. Although India has not sent any troops there, but it has invested a lot of money in the country to make sure it, to fuel its development. Now, the Taliban gaining legitimacy may now see India softening towards that group, because India needs to have, it is in India's interests, like I've been saying, to have a stable Pakistan. And if Taliban wields a lot of influence in the country, then automatically India will need to start talking to that group. In fact, Chief of Defence Staff Bipin Rawat, in fact, has also lobbied for this. He said that talks with Taliban should begin, and we should start engaging diplomatically with the armed group. But this does not come without conditions. In case India decides to soften towards Taliban, there are conditions India has set. Now, there are several of them, and let me name them. One, India wants that Afghanistan territory should not be used to launch terror attacks or to train terror groups. So no terror-related activity should take place on Afghani soil. So that is one of the conditions. Another condition is that any talks, any issue has to be solved, and keeping the democratically elected Afghanistan government in mind. The Taliban has to speak to the Ashraf Ghani-led government. So the democratically elected government remains the priority. It takes precedence on all Afghani matters. India has also said that human rights need to be respected, women's rights need to be respected, and the democratically elected government in Afghanistan needs to be respected. And on these several conditions, India is ready to relent and ready to reach out to the Taliban. In fact, however, the Taliban, on the other hand, has never really seen the elected government in Afghanistan as legitimate. It has so far called it a US puppet, and the Taliban also believes that it does follow Islamic law as far as women's rights is concerned. But however, it takes that as a reason. However, I mean, on paper and in practice, on paper it says it follows women's rights, but in practice we know how oppressed the women of Afghanistan really are. So will Taliban walk the talk? That remains to be seen. But for now, they've agreed to all of these terms and conditions applied by the international community in order to get that peace deal through, and which will now ensure that US troops basically start withdrawing from Afghanistan, which is something the Taliban desperately wants, and which is something even the United States at this juncture desperately wants. So India now must and probably will choose to start talking to the Taliban. And that is demonstrated very importantly by the fact that on the 29th of February, India will send an envoy to this signing ceremony, the signing of the peace deal. India is going to send an official representative. India has been sent an official invite. So this is the first time India will officially be participating in this Taliban and US peace deal process. Earlier, India had sent its representatives as observers. They were not officially participating. So this seems to be a huge reversal in the way India has chosen to deal with the Taliban. And of course, it remains to be seen how India takes this further, whether there'll be more softening towards Taliban as it regains a huge foothold back in our strategically important neighbor of Afghanistan. That was all this time. Thanks for watching.